He left school at 16 with no engineering degree, no family fortune, and no automobile in sight. He spent his teenage years covered in locomotive grease in a Yorkshire rail yard, learning how to build train engines, not car engines, not racing engines, but train engines. You would think that a boy like that, the youngest of 9 children from a modest London family, a railway apprentice who had never sat behind the wheel of a motor car, could never build one of the most prestigious automotive brands the world has ever known. But Walter Owen Bentley won Le Mans 5 times. He designed the engines that powered the most successful fighter aircraft of the First World War. He built a luxury car company from scratch with nothing but £8,000 and absolute conviction. And he created a name that the wealthiest people on Earth still beg to put on the front of their cars more than 100 years later. So how did a railway apprentice's kid from Hampstead become the man behind Bentley? To find out, we have to go back to September 16, 1888. Walter Owen Bentley was born in Hampstead, North London, the youngest of 9 children. His father, Alfred Bentley, was a retired businessman, comfortable enough to send his children to decent schools, not wealthy enough to open any doors for them. His mother, Emily, came from Australian merchant stock. They were, by the standards of late Victorian England, a respectable middle-class family, the kind that gave you a solid education and then stepped back to let you figure the rest out for yourself. And young Walter, from the very beginning, was going to figure it out his own way. At age 9, he got his hands on a second-hand bicycle. Most boys that age would ride it until the wheels fell off. Walter took it apart. Every gear, every spoke, every component was laid out on the floor until he understood exactly how the thing worked. Then he put it back together, better than it had come apart. His mother probably had opinions about this. Walter didn't care. The habit was already setting in, the instinct to look at a working machine and ask not how it ran, but how it could run better. That instinct had a name. It was not curiosity. It was something more relentless than that. It was the refusal to accept a mechanism as a black box, the absolute need to understand a thing at every level before you could claim to truly know it. That compulsion, that particular kind of engineering hunger, is not something you can teach a person. You either have it or you don't. Walter Owen Bentley had it from the age of 9, and it never left him. It was the railways, though, that gave that obsession its scale. Growing up in Edwardian England, surrounded by the greatest mechanical achievement of the industrial age, Walter would watch the massive steam locomotives thunder through his world and feel something close to reverence. These were not merely machines. They were power made visible, thousands of precisely machined parts working together in controlled fury to produce motion of breathtaking force and startling grace. He didn't just want to watch those locomotives. He wanted to understand them from the inside out. And then, in some way he could not yet articulate, he wanted to build something that made people feel the same thing. His schooling was respectable, but unremarkable. Walter was not an academic child. He was an observational one. He learned by doing, by touching, by taking apart. The formal classroom could not contain the way his mind worked, and after a few years at Clifton College in Bristol, the decision was made that Walter would go into engineering. The only question was, what kind? In 1905, at 16, his father paid £75, a significant sum for a family of limited means, for a 5-year premium apprenticeship at the Great Northern Railway's locomotive works in Doncaster. This was not a glamorous posting. The Doncaster works were vast, loud, physically brutal, and covered in soot. The apprentices were not managers in training. They were workers. They cast metal. They machined parts. They learned through long days of hard physical labor. that engineering was not an abstract intellectual exercise, but a matter of getting your hands into the work and understanding every component by feel as much as by calculation. The man overseeing the works was Henry Ivatt, chief mechanical engineer and one of the great locomotive designers of the Edwardian era. Under Ivatt's influence, Walter Bentley began to develop the engineering sensibility that would define everything he would later do. Ivatt believed that a great engineer was not someone who simply applied established principles, but someone who interrogated those principles constantly, asking whether they could be improved upon. It was not a bad lesson for a boy who had already started taking apart bicycles to see if he could put them back together better. Those 5 years in Doncaster were the crucible. Walter learned to design complex machinery from fundamental principles. He learned that the difference between a component that works and one that fails under sustained stress can be measured in thousandths of an inch. He learned how forces move through mechanical systems over long periods of operation, not just at peak performance, but during the hours and days and thousands of miles when a machine must prove that its design is genuinely sound rather than merely ambitious. And he learned, perhaps most crucially, that great engineering is not primarily about clever ideas. It is about the disciplined execution of clever ideas, understanding what you are doing at every level from the grandest principle to the smallest detail, and refusing to accept anything less than complete mastery of both. By the end of his apprenticeship in 1910, he had earned the privilege of riding the footplate of a mainline express as a second fireman. Picture that for a moment. The boy who had dismantled a bicycle in his mother's house 11 years earlier was now clinging to the cab of one of those enormous Atlantic locomotives he had idolized as a child, feeling the full, terrifying power of controlled combustion beneath his feet at speed. He later wrote about the experience with something close to awe. These machines moved him in a way that very little else in life would. He understood them the way a musician understands sound, not just intellectually, but in the gut. But the railways had a structural problem that no amount of passion could solve. Promotion was glacial. A young man could spend decades in the works waiting for the opportunity to actually design a locomotive. The hierarchy was rigid, the timescale measured in generations, and the reward for patience was another decade of patience. Walter Bentley was 22 years old. He had given 5 years of his youth to learning how the greatest machines of the industrial age were built. The idea of waiting another 20 or 30 years to actually design one of his own was not a future he was willing to accept. The internal combustion engine offered an escape. It was clean, modern, and small enough for one gifted engineer to genuinely master in a way that the enormous complexity of locomotive design never permitted. And unlike the railways, it was a field still young enough that a determined outsider could genuinely matter. In 1912, alongside his older brother Horace, Walter formed a partnership called Bentley and Bentley, operating from premises at 10 Hanover Street in London. Their business was selling French DFP cars, Doriot, Flandrin, et Parent, imported from Paris and sold to British buyers who wanted a light, sporting motor car at a reasonable price. It was a modest beginning. They were salesmen, not engineers, not manufacturers, just two brothers selling someone else's cars. And if W.O. had been content to remain a salesman, that is where the story would have ended. But he wasn't. He looked at the DFP engines the way he had looked at that bicycle as a 9-year-old. They worked. They got the cars from one place to another without catching fire or falling apart. But they could work better, much better. The question was how. The answer came in 1913 on a visit to the DFP factory offices in Paris. W.O. was walking through the offices when he noticed an aluminium paperweight sitting on a desk. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, felt its weight, lighter than you expected for its size, harder than it looked. And a question occurred to him that would change automotive engineering forever. What if you made engine pistons out of this? The pistons in virtually every production engine of that era were made of cast iron, heavy, slow to accelerate, prone to heat buildup under hard use. The engineers who designed them were not stupid men. They had reasons for choosing iron, including its durability and machinability. But W.O. saw past the conventional reasoning to the physical reality. A lighter piston moved faster. Less mass meant lower inertia, which meant the engine could rev higher without destroying itself. And higher revs, all else being equal, meant more power. The technical challenges were significant. Aluminium had not been used for engine pistons before, and there were real questions about whether an aluminium alloy could withstand the mechanical and thermal stresses of sustained hard running. The alloy ratio had to be exactly right. Too much aluminium and the pistons would be too soft, too little, and you lost the weight advantage you were seeking. The conventional wisdom in the engineering world was firmly against it, for reasons that were not unreasonable. W.O. Bentley did not care about conventional wisdom. He cared about what the physics said was possible. After months of careful experimentation, he settled on a formula that would prove definitive: 88% aluminium, 12% copper. He fitted the new pistons to a DFP engine, modified the camshaft to take advantage of the extra performance the lighter components permitted, and took the car to Brooklands, the famous banked motor racing circuit in Surrey that served as Britain's primary proving ground for automotive performance. The results were not subtle. In 1913, that modified DFP set a new flying mile record at Brooklands, 89.7 miles per hour, faster than any car in its class had gone before. The record did not stand alone for long. Through the rest of 1913 and into 1914, DFP cars fitted with W.O.'s aluminium pistons broke record after record on the circuit. Other manufacturers watched these results with great attention. Rolls-Royce noticed. Sunbeam noticed. Within a remarkably short time, aluminium pistons began appearing in engines produced by manufacturers who had never been told what W.O. Bentley had done, but whose engineers had reached similar conclusions by similar reasoning. W.O. Bentley, selling French cars out of a London showroom, had already changed the industry he was operating in, and he was still just 25 years old. Then the war came. In August 1914, the world that Walter Owen Bentley had grown up in began to tear itself apart. For many men of his generation, the war represented catastrophe. Careers ended, plans destroyed, lives cut short before they had properly begun. For W.O. Bentley, it provided something unexpected: the opportunity to solve the most consequential engineering problem of the 20th century's first great conflict. In 1914, he was recruited by the Royal Naval Air Service as a technical advisor. He was not a decorated military officer. He was not a traditional aviation engineer. He was a man who understood rotary engines, the type of engine then used in most Allied aircraft, with unusual depth and precision, and the Navy desperately needed better ones. The problem with Allied aircraft engines was not that they failed to work. It was that they failed to keep working. Specifically, they had an alarming tendency to fail at the worst possible moments, often with fatal results for the men sitting behind them. The French-designed Clerget rotary engine powering most British naval aircraft was the best available option, but it had fundamental design problems that made it dangerous under sustained operational use. The pistons cracked, the engine ran hot, The tolerances between moving parts were insufficient for the demands being placed on them by combat flying conditions. Brave men were climbing into aeroplanes and dying not because they were outflown by German pilots, but because the engines beneath them gave out at critical moments. That was not a problem that a better pilot could solve. It was an engineering problem. And engineering problems were what Walter Owen Bentley was built for. He went to work at the Humber Company's facilities in Coventry. What he produced there was characteristic of everything he had done before, not invention from nothing, but the disciplined application of superior engineering intelligence to an existing design. He studied the Clerget engine with the same systematic attention he had given to locomotive components and DFP pistons. He identified precisely what was failing and why, and then he fixed it. Aluminium alloy cylinders replaced the heavier steel originals. Cast iron liners inside the cylinders provided precision sealing, a detail that proved critical to long-term reliability. Aluminium pistons replaced steel ones, applying the same reasoning he had proven at Brooklands 2 years earlier. A longer stroke extracted additional power from the same displacement. The resulting engine ran dramatically cooler, proved far more reliable under sustained operational conditions, and produced meaningfully more power than the unit it replaced. The result was the Bentley Rotary 1, the BR1, 150 horsepower, and the aircraft that flew into battle powered by W.O. Bentley's engine was the Sopwith Camel. The Camel is not merely the most famous British fighter of the First World War. It is, by the most rigorous historical accounting available, the most effective combat aircraft of the entire conflict, credited with destroying more enemy aircraft than any other Allied plane. More than 2,400 Camels were built. Thousands of them carried the BR-1 into combat, and Bentley was already working on what came next. The BR-2 was larger, more ambitious, more powerful, nearly 25 litres of displacement, 230 horsepower, the most powerful production rotary engine ever built. It powered the Sopwith Snipe, the finest British fighter aircraft of the war's final months, the plane that represented the full flowering of Allied aviation capability before the armistice brought the fighting to an end. The man who had spent his teenage years learning to build train engines in Yorkshire had just helped win an air war. When the armistice came in November 1918, Walter Bentley was 30 years old. He had a war record of extraordinary distinction. He had an engineering mind sharpened to a razor's edge by years of solving problems where the penalty for failure was measured in human lives. And when the Commission of Awards to Inventors reviewed his wartime contributions, the British government awarded him £8,000. It was not a fortune. But W.O. Bentley looked at that £8,000 and saw something most people would not have seen. He didn't see security. He didn't see an opportunity to invest conservatively and live comfortably. He saw exactly enough money to attempt something audacious. On the 10th of January 1919, Bentley Motors Limited was registered. The company had almost no physical assets beyond that award and the lease on a small office. No factory, no established workforce, no supply chain, no track record as a car manufacturer, no wealthy backers to smooth the path. What it had was W.O. Bentley's certainty, absolute, unshakable, perhaps slightly irrational, that he could build the finest motor car in England. Not a fine motor car, the finest. He said it plainly. The policy was simple. We were going to make a fast car, a good car, the best in its class. Simple to state, staggering to execute from nothing. The first production Bentley, the 3-litre, began to take shape over the next 2 years. W.O. designed it with the same obsessive attention to engineering integrity that had characterized everything he had done since taking that bicycle apart in his mother's house. The engine was a 3-litre, 4-cylinder unit with an overhead camshaft, technically ambitious for 1919, when most production cars used simpler side valve configurations. He specified dual spark plugs per cylinder for reliability. He demanded that every component be tested to limits far beyond what it would encounter in normal use. The car was not designed to be adequate. It was designed to be genuinely superior. The first production Bentley 3-litre was delivered to its first customer in September 1921. It was expensive, well beyond what ordinary buyers could consider. It was large and demanding to drive. And it was, by the assessment of everyone who drove one, extraordinary. Fast, stable, capable of sustained high speed over long distances without mechanical complaint. It felt unlike anything else available in England, because it had been built to a standard of engineering integrity that nothing else in England had been built to. W.O. had a very specific theory about how to prove that. He believed, with a conviction that he never tempered over the course of his life, that racing was the only honest test of an automobile's true quality, not advertising copy, not the endorsements of famous names, not the opinions of journalists who had driven a car on a smooth track on a sunny afternoon. Racing, sustained, merciless competition against the best machinery from every manufacturer in the world, over distances and at speeds, and in conditions that exposed every weakness a design possessed. The racing policy, W.O. said, was part of the very foundations of Bentley Motors for the two vital purposes of testing and publicizing our cars. And the race that represented the ultimate test was the 24 hours of Le Mans. In 1923, a Bentley 3-litre entered Le Mans for the first time. W.O. Bentley himself initially had reservations about the wisdom of this. 24 straight hours of flat-out racing over public roads through the night in conditions that exposed every flaw in a car's engineering. He was not certain his cars were ready for it. "I think the whole thing is crazy," he said before the race. "Cars are not designed to stand that sort of strain for 24 hours. That first Bentley finished fourth at Le Mans in 1923 and set the fastest lap of the race. W.O.'s reservations evaporated very quickly. The following year, 1924, John Duff and Frank Clement drove a Bentley 3-litre to outright victory at Le Mans, the first British constructor ever to win the race. The automotive world took notice, and one particular man took notice in a way that would change Bentley Motors' future entirely. His name was Wolf Barnato. He was the son of a South African diamond and gold mining magnate, heir to a personal fortune that made W.O.'s £8,000 look like pocket change. He was also a racing driver, fast, fearless, with the kind of natural mechanical sympathy that cannot be manufactured, and the financial resources to indulge it without limit. After watching Bentley win at Le Mans in 1924, Barnato invested more than £100,000 into Bentley Motors. It was the financial lifeline the company desperately needed, and it released something extraordinary. Barnato did not just save the company, he drove for it. The Bentley Boys, as the press came to call them, were a group of wealthy, fast-living British racing drivers who competed for the marker throughout the late 1920s. Barnato, Tim Birkin, Bernard Rubin, Dudley Bengerfield, Jack Dunphy. They were not factory development drivers in any conventional sense. They were men of genuine means, who had determined that the finest way to spend their time and their money was driving the finest cars in the world, as fast as those cars would go. And the finest cars in the world, they were all quite sure about this, were Bentleys. In 1927, Bentley won Le Mans again, under circumstances that required a last-minute, desperate recovery from a catastrophic multi-car accident in the opening hours of the race. In 1928, Barnato drove a Bentley Speed 6 to victory himself. In 1929, the 4 cars that crossed the line in first, second, third, and fourth place at Le Mans were all Bentleys, a clean sweep, a statement of dominance so absolute that it required no embellishment. In 1930, Barnato won again. 5 Le Mans victories in 7 years. 5 times, the most demanding endurance race in the world had been won by cars built by a man who had learned his engineering in a railway yard in Yorkshire. A man who had started with £8,000 and a conviction. But here is where the story turns in a direction that W.O. Bentley never fully recovered from. Because success on the racetrack and success as a business are 2 entirely different things. And Bentley Motors was about to discover that it could be magnificent at one and catastrophic at the other simultaneously. Building Bentleys was expensive. Not merely expensive in the particular way that trying to build the best possible version of something always is. The Bentley Speed 6, that had just won Le Mans 4 times, was a masterwork of British engineering. It was also a car that cost more than most families earned in several years, and the number of buyers capable of purchasing one was limited under any economic conditions. In October 1929, those conditions became terrible. The Wall Street crash sent shockwaves through every economy connected to the American financial system, which meant every economy in the world. The Great Depression followed, not a temporary recession, but a sustained collapse of economic activity that reduced demand for luxury goods to near zero. The men who bought Bentleys were wealthy, but even the wealthy found their resources contracting sharply in 1929 and 1930. Orders slowed. Cash flow tightened. The financial pressures that W.O. had been managing never easily since the company's founding became severe. By July 1931, Bentley Motors was bankrupt. 12 years. The war engines, the aluminium pistons, 5 Le Mans victories, some of the most beautiful and capable motor cars ever built, and the company was bankrupt. A receiver was appointed. The company's assets were put up for sale. Prospective buyers circled, and then an offer came in from a financial firm called the British Central Equitable Trust. The offer was £125,000. W.O., seeing no better alternative emerging, signed the paperwork that transferred his company to this buyer. Only afterward did he discover the truth. The British Central Equitable Trust was a front company, a legal fiction constructed for the specific purpose of concealing the identity of the actual buyer, because that buyer had calculated correctly that the seller would not have accepted the offer if he had known who was making it. The actual buyer was Rolls-Royce Limited. Rolls-Royce, the manufacturer that had watched W.O.'s aluminium pistons break records at Brooklands in 1913, that had competed against his cars for more than a decade, that had been described by the motoring press as the greatest rival to Bentley for the title of England's finest automobile, had purchased Bentley Motors, not to build upon it, not to honor its racing heritage, to neutralize a competitor. They had done it without W.O. Bentley knowing until the moment the paperwork was in his hand. They had used a front company to conceal their identity precisely because they understood that W.O., if he had known, would have found some other path rather than allow his life's work to be absorbed by the firm he considered his most formidable rival. I want you to sit with what that must have felt like. 12 years of your life, the railway yard, the war engines, Le Mans 5 times. The company that bore your name, built from £8,000 and nothing else. And you are the last person in the room to know who has just bought it. W.O. stayed on with Rolls-Royce for a time. He was not a man who expressed bitterness easily, and he continued to work with professional integrity in a situation that would have destroyed less composed men. But it was not his company anymore. It bore his name, and it had lost his soul. He left in 1935. He went to Lagonda, where he designed engines that were technically distinguished and commercially unremarked. He lived quietly, thought carefully, and watched from a distance as the name he had given his dream became something that neither he nor anyone who had built it with him fully controlled. He wrote his memoirs, a careful, precise account that read exactly the way you would expect from a man trained to report what he observed without embellishment. He was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire. He was awarded honorary doctorates and the respect of his peers in the engineering world, men who understood what he had done and knew how difficult it had been to do it. In 1969, the Bentley Drivers Club held a dinner in his honor. He was 80 years old and still sharp, still the same man who had stood in that Doncaster workshop 6 decades earlier, asking whether the thing in front of him could be made to work better. He passed away on August 13, 1971, at the age of 82, with the quiet dignity of a man who knew exactly what he had accomplished and needed no one to tell him. Long enough to see what Bentley had become, long enough to see the name on the bonnets of cars that cost 100 times what he had paid for the entire company's founding, long enough to understand that the thing he had built, even stripped from his ownership and his control, had proven impossible to diminish. The name was too honest. The engineering had been too real. The Le Mans victories had been too absolute. You cannot manufacture that kind of reputation. You can only earn it the way W.O. Bentley earned it, one precise component at a time, one problem solved at a time, one race won at a time, over a lifetime of refusing to accept anything less than genuinely excellent work. Today, Bentley Motors generates revenue approaching 3 billion euros annually. Volkswagen Group, which acquired the brand in 1998, has invested hundreds of millions in reviving and expanding the marque across a range of models, from the Continental GT to the Bentayga SUV, that extend the original ethos of fast, luxurious, mechanically serious motor cars to an audience W.O. could not have imagined. The company has recorded its 6th consecutive profitable year as of 2024, with operating profits that reflect the enduring power of a name built on genuine engineering integrity rather than marketing invention. Average selling prices continue to climb because Bentley buyers are not paying for transportation. They are paying for a connection to something rare, a mark that was born not in a boardroom or a marketing department, but in the mind of a boy who dismantled a bicycle to understand how it worked, and who never in his life stopped asking whether the thing in front of him could be made to work better. W.O. Bentley said once that he had always wanted to produce, in his words, a dead silent 100 miles per hour car. And then he added quietly, "I think that we have done it." He had started with £8,000, a railway apprentice's education, and an absolute conviction. The world had pushed back with a depression, with a betrayal, with a bankruptcy that stripped his name from his hands while he watched. And still the name endured. Still the cars held the road. Still the 5 Le Mans trophies sat in a case somewhere, bronze and permanent and impossible to argue with. A railway apprentice's son from Hampstead, grease under his fingernails, a dream that the world kept trying to take from him and never fully could. He did it.